Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the California Consultation Series hosted by Circular Action Alliance, or CAA. My name is Frances Oni, and I will be moderating today's webinar. First, let's review today's agenda. Next slide, please. We will introduce our panelists, then we'll give an overview of CAA and SB 54. Next, we'll have a presentation on responsible end markets, followed by a Q&A period. We'll finish off today's webinar by reviewing important next steps. With that, let's meet today's panelists. Emily Coven is CAA's California Executive Director. Pierre Benavides is a Technical Advisor. Ross Bergman is Senior Manager. And Roxanne Speakerman is Plastics Director. I want to highlight a few important reminders. Today's presentation is intended for informational purposes only. CAA is not a law firm and does not provide legal advice. If you need legal guidance, please consult with your own counsel. Next slide, please. We want to underscore our commitment to compliance with federal and state antitrust laws. As participants, we need to avoid discussions around pricing, market allocation, or other topics that could create even the appearance of anti-competitive behavior. A few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded, and both the recording and the slide deck will be available on CAA's California Consultation webpage. After today's webinar, you'll also receive a link to a questionnaire. We encourage you to complete it within 30 days as your input is essential to shaping a practical and effective program plan. Please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions, and we'll address as many questions as possible during the Q&A portion of this webinar. All participants will remain muted throughout this session. CAA provides updates on program plan development at the Producer Responsibility Advisory Board meetings, which anyone can attend by registering on CalRecycle's website. We encourage you to register and attend the remainder of CAA's California Consultation Series webinars. Now, I would like to hand it over to Emily Coven, CAA's California Executive Director.
Thanks, Frances. Yeah, so I'm going to give just a quick introduction to CAA for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Circular Action Alliance. If you have attended past webinars, you will have heard this before, and I would encourage you for the next few minutes to find something else to do so you don't have to listen to me say the same thing over and over. So next slide, please. So what is the Circular Action Alliance? We are a nonprofit producer responsibility organization, and we were founded by the companies that you see on the screen in front of you. Basically what we do is we implement EPR laws for paper and packaging across the US. Next slide. So you can see on this slide where we work. CAA is a remote organization, so we actually have team members all across the US as well as in Canada, and we're specifically working in the states where you see highlighted in the sort of dark blue. So Oregon was the first US state to go live with a packaging EPR program. That was earlier this year. Colorado is going to be next, and California will be the third state. Minnesota, Maryland, not far behind. And so one of the great things about CAA is that we're able to learn from our colleagues in other states. So we don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel here in California. So we can learn what's working in Oregon, what's working in Colorado, what's not working, and adjust accordingly. We also have quite a few members of our team from Canada, and that's because packaging EPR happened a lot earlier in Canada than it did here in the US. And so a lot of our team members were involved in those efforts and can, again, bring that institutional knowledge of what worked and didn't work in Canada here to us in California. Next slide. So in terms of what a producer responsibility organization is, we do a whole bunch of different things. So starting at the top of the clock here, the first thing we do is we engage with communities and interest holders. That's what you are participating in today. We are going to, the next thing on the clock as you go to 2 o'clock is planning. So really what our big effort right now is developing a program plan that says how we are going to implement SB 54. So this consultation process is critical. We need to hear from communities. We need to hear from all interest holders to ensure that our plan accurately reflects the needs and the situation in California today. Once we get that plan approved, we'll submit the plan to the state on June 15th or by June 15th. Once that plan is approved, we move into actually implementing the plan. One of the first things we do is we facilitate compliance for the producer. So we set fees, we collect fees from the producers. Those fees are also meant to incentivize the producers to make packaging changes. And then we take those fees and we use them to invest in the recycling system in the state of California. And then we also educate the public about changes that are made as a result of the law. So that's super, super high level, but spend a little bit more time with this in your own free time if you can. And it's really helpful for us to have the community understand what we do. Next slide. So one of the things we're also trying to do in explaining who we are and what we do is differentiating from who CalRecycle is and what CalRecycle does. So our role in SB 54 is planning and implementation. We are the doers. We are making everything actually happen. CalRecycle is the regulator and they have oversight. And so if you have concerns about what is in the regulations, that is something to communicate to CalRecycle. If you have concerns about how the regulations are being implemented, that is what you communicate to us. So we're really trying to get to where people aren't ping-ponged back and forth, where we say, ask CalRecycle, and CalRecycle says, ask CAA. So we're working towards that. And please be patient, but it's great for everybody to understand a little bit better. So again, I won't read through all this, but if you want to read it in your own time, that'd be awesome. Next slide. So what is SB 54? I'm sure you're all aware that it is a, big law with big goals. Here are the three, kind of biggest components that we're working towards. So reducing single-use plastic by 25%, with 10% of that coming from reuse and refill or elimination, and recycling 65% of single-use plastic in California. Both of those are sort of aggregate goals across all producers, and therefore the obligation for achieving that falls onto CAA as the pro. And then there's this third goal of ensuring that 100% of packaging is recyclable or compostable. And that's an obligation that falls onto each producer. So every single producer selling goods into the state of California is required to achieve that target. These are the 2032 targets. There are earlier targets that stair step up between now and then, but when we are building out our plan, this is ultimately our end goal that we're working towards, is to achieve or exceed all of these targets. Next slide. So in terms of the process that we are working on right now, we are building a program plan that is going to be a sizable document that really spells out how we're going to achieve all of these targets. And what we're asking for today is your ideas. And I kind of boxed in this visual of ideas with a couple things to represent the constraints that we are operating under here as we build the program plan. So when I ask for your ideas, I want all of your ideas. I want your wild ideas, your crazy ideas. No idea is a bad idea. And I also want you to be aware that we do have some constraints. So the biggest one is we have to operate within statute and regulations. So we can't do things that are not part of SB 54 or, counter to the laws or the regulations. We have time constraints. There are some things that you can do in packaging that would be amazing, but would take 20 years. And our goal is 2032. So we have to do things that happen quickly. We have financial constraints. We will be gathering fees from producers, but they are not infinite. So we have to spend wisely and cost efficiently. And we have our biggest challenge is the unknowns. We still don't have final regulations. And so we have to, come up with ideas that are our best guess of what the final regulations are going to be. And there's a lot of other unknowns and uncertainty as well. But we forge on. Final slide here that I have is, that's okay, you can go ahead. State of California, I just want to communicate to all of you who are here today and really encourage you to participate, because we need your ideas, and also because California has a really unique opportunity in our country. So when this program is fully implemented, it will be the single largest packaging EPR program in the world. I think we all know California is the size of a country economically, the size of a large country, but it's not just the size of California, it's the ambition of this legislation. And it's also the fact that everybody is looking to California to see what happens here. So I've heard many times the world is watching California. All eyes are on California. This is really true from everything I've heard. So when you contribute to this plan, you're contributing to a successful EPR program, not just in California, but that will inspire and influence what happens all around the world. So it's a really amazing opportunity for us here in California, and I really encourage you to participate in the process. And with that, I will hand it over to Pierre to talk about responsible end markets.
Thank you very much, Emily, and good morning, everyone. Happy to present the responsible end market components. And let's go over with the next slide. Thank you. So a bit of context before we dive into the topic. The reason why we have a responsible end market or REM focus for this consultation series is because it is an important topic. First and foremost, to be considered recycled, the collected and covered material must be sold to responsible end markets. And as you will see over the presentation, the pro has responsibility, legal responsibility around that. To start with, it must ensure that there are sufficient and viable responsible end market for California. The draft regulation is covering the different requirements that we will cover today, but the presentation will go as follows. We will first unpack what is a REM, actually what's being a REM means for California. We will provide early learnings from the EPR implementation in Oregon that has a REM component as well. And for the last 3 months, we've learned a lot on this. We will present the preliminary findings of the current end market capacity for the state of California, and then share the vision and the approach we have for verification and development of the responsible end market. And you will hear me during the presentation making a clear distinction between the two. That's one of the main takeaway I want you get from that presentation. And finally, obviously, as for the other consultation, we will take your questions and receive the feedback from you here today, and after that, with the survey from different interest holders. Next slide. So let's go with the basic. What is a responsible end market? This is a concept that has been introduced in most of the EPR laws in the US. And with, I would say, the same common definition, which is a market processing material from the different states in a way that benefits the environment and minimizes the risk to public health and worker health and safety. So the definition is similar between the different states. Between the different states, you also have a statutory obligation for the pro to verify the end markets against the REM requirements that we are going to cover today. And you also have obligation for service provider with regards to REM that are a bit different from one state to another. The other thing that varies by state is the requirements, how you measure an end market against the REM concept. Some states, including the state of California, are more prescriptive on the approach than others, like the state of Colorado. The requirements are typically detailed in the rulemaking, and that is, currently in the draft mode for the state of California. Next slide, please. So we know what's a REM, then we need to understand who can be qualified as a responsible end market. I would say that in general, for most of the material except for compostable, the definition of who is the responsible end market or the end market, it's the entity that is making a feedstock that can replace virgin material. When it comes to compostable, you could say that it's more or less similar, but the definition that are in the current rules is the entity that converts material into recycled organic product. And my colleague Isabel has provided a full webinar on that specifically. So you need to make sure that this entity is the one making the feedstock that can replace virgin material. But in terms of location, that entity could be located anywhere in the world. So it could be in the state of California, it could be in the Pacific Northwest or outside of the US, in Canada, in Mexico, but it could be as well in Malaysia. Actually, in order to be an end market subject to become a responsible end market, you need one, to make a feedstock that replaces virgin material, and two, you need to process material from the state of California. So again, you could be anywhere in the world as long as you meet those two conditions. Next slide, please. To give some examples, you will have that deck, so you can go into the details, but I will focus on two examples, first one on paper and the second one on plastic. So an end market entity, according to the role for the paper, could be either a paper mill that is making a pulp, and that pulp become the feedstock that can replace virgin material. So it could make containerboard product, it could make new packaging, tissue product, or that could be also a roof board converter that is using, for instance, cartons and polycoated paper to make a final product. And then the final product become the equivalent of the feedstock that is replacing virgin material. And again, that paper mill or that converter could be located in California, could be located in Oregon. We will see that in the next couple of slides, but it could also be located in Malaysia or Vietnam or any other country. For plastic, it's the same logic as an example. So a plastic recycler typically make flakes or make pellets, and then those pellets are sold to a converter, and the converter is using that pellet to make new packaging or other product, as you see on the screen here. It could be drain pipes, construction product, garbage bags. That's just examples. But the entity that is making the pellets, so the plastic recycler, is the end market entity because the pellet is the feedstock that replaces virgin material. Next slide, please. So what are the different requirements for the pro for CAA as part of that responsible end market components? So we have two kind of requirements. One is the verification. The second one is the development. And I will, during the presentation, make the difference between the two. When it comes to the verification, we need basically to identify the different end markets, including the non-mechanical recycling end markets. And we need to describe a process by which we will verify those end markets against the REM requirements that I'm going to present in the next couple of slides. That is for the verification piece. When we go to the development, the requirement is different. We need to make sure we provide sufficient support, including financial support to assist responsible end markets. And we need to plan to develop new responsible end market to meet the regulation requirements. Next slide, please. So again, I will emphasize on that. Just to be clear, we have two components that are very different. The end market verification is more or less an audit process. It is based on the responsible standard, and the approach that I'm going to present to you today is that we want to conduct that verification with the support of a third-party auditor. Why? Because we want to ensure the confidentiality and the impartiality of the process, which is the same that you see in other audits methods for financial audit or any kind of other audit a facility might have to go through. That is the verification aspect. The development is different. This one will be led by CAA, and you will see we intend to do that in collaboration with different partners. But the goal here is to make sure we could increase the capacity both in terms of volume and quality. So we want to process more recovered material and recycle more recovered material to meet the different targets that Emily provided a bit earlier. Next slide, please. So as we have mentioned, we are lucky for California that this REM concept, which is a new concept in EPR regulation, has been implemented for the last 3 months or so in the state of Oregon. And we have already gone through a series of consultation for both the state of Oregon and Colorado that include that responsible end market approach. So we are now at the point of extended that approach to California, but we are committed to the same process, which is collaborating with the industry, collaborating with the governments, the NGOs, and actually any other interested party for making sure we could have a process for verification that is practical, that is enforceable, but that would meet the three conditions you see on the screen here. One, we are able to protect the confidentiality of the information that will be provided by the end markets. Two, we want to make sure we maintain the market stability. And three, as you will see over the presentation, we want to make sure we have an approach that seek for as much as possible harmonization across the different states. If you are a plastic recycler pulling material from across the country, you want to make sure that you don't have as many audits as there are jurisdiction they are pulling material from. So that's something that we keep in mind in order to apply that responsible end market approach. Next slide, please. So we've been through that consultation process for other states. We've been through early implementation in Oregon, and we can already draw some conclusions. The first one is that we are making a lot of progress to engage the industry since the beginning of this year, actually. So we've been to consultation and webinars. We have met individually with almost 100 different end market entities and their trade associations, both in the US, North America, and even overseas. So we've heard a lot of the feedback from the industry already on that, and we understand that there are two concerns that emerge from that consultation. The first one is that this process must ensure that we manage the sensitive information to protect it, actually. So the disclosure of that sensitive information, especially when it comes to stuff like yield, is critical for the end market that we have consulted. The other concerns that we've learned from that early consultation is that the methodology we will use to measure the compliance against the REM requirement will be critical. You will see when we will go into that detail that the regulation is broad in terms of the requirements, so the devil will be in the details of the methodology we will apply to employ that measurements. We need, and that's the third point, to build trust in this industry. This is a new concept. I'm repeating myself, but this is important. Responsible end market is a new concept. That doesn't mean all the pros in all the jurisdiction are not going through a due diligence process, but it is not something that is a legal obligation as compared to what we have in the US. And so us as CAA, we need to do a lot of education on the end market, but also need to make sure that they know who we are and why we are doing that. Because you can imagine that if you are a paper mill facility in Malaysia or a plastic recycler wherever it is in the US, you might not even know who is CAA and why is CAA going after some very sensitive information. So that's why we need to build that trust and continue to engage industry on those requirements. So all of that led us to the fourth and actually main conclusion that we need a phased approach to implement the REM verification. So we need that approach to balance the need to demonstrate the alignments and the compliance with the REM requirements, but in the meantime, to reduce as much as possible the admin burden that comes with an audit. So this is the guiding principle of what I'm going to present today in more detail with the REM approach. Next slide, please. So let's dive in. Let's go to identification and verification. So where do we start? Where are we right now in terms of where are the different markets? We have engaged different consultants. We now have still preliminary, but a good understanding of what is the existing capacity for different material coming from the state of California. So we understand that we have markets, including in California, for glass, for steel and UBC, for I would say most of the rigid plastics, PET, HDPE, and PP, and also for fibers, OCC and mixed paper, although for that one, this is mainly an overseas market. So there is markets. That doesn't mean that there is not challenges, but we have the infrastructure that exists for those type of material. We do understand, however, that there are some end market where for some material, we have end market gaps. So that's the case for PET thermoform. That's the case for film and flexible, polycoated paper, cartons to some degree, and non-UBC aluminum. So you will see when we will go in that part of the presentation related to end market development that the focus would be on those type of materials. Next slide over, please. As I have said, we have indication that California is dependent on the export market, especially for the fiber, from what we understand. We have commissioned a study, and that study reveals to us that California exports close to 80-90% of the recovered fibers, mainly in Southeast Asian countries. And from those, Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam are the major destination for the recovered fiber from the state of California. So obviously, when it comes to that consideration and us doing the verification of the end markets, that's an extra layer of complexity we need to consider. And that's why, when I said that we want to make sure that we are partnering with different stakeholders, actually on that specific case, we want to make sure that we partner with other jurisdictions that are already going through some sort of verification of those markets. That being said, we understand that this is a reality for the state of California, reality being the export to overseas markets. And that's for different reasons. One, especially for fiber, there is not necessarily domestic processing capacities. There is very few paper mills in California, and the one in the Pacific Northwest are, at capacity with many different type of sources. Two, the overseas market is quite competitive. And three, obviously, in California, there is the largest port in North America. So that's trending towards more export as well. So again, this is a consideration for us moving forward with both verification and development. Next slide, please. So let's go to the identification first, and then we'll dive into the other components. What is the role of CAA for identifying the end markets? Our role is to make sure that in the plan, we identify the method by which we will identify the responsible end markets. So we have a menu of options for that. The first one, obviously, is to connect with existing end markets already registered for the state of Oregon and for the state of Colorado. So by connecting with them, we could identify whether they are currently or they might in the future process material from the state of California. The second option is to work directly with the MRFs. Typically, in other states, MRFs have an obligation to sell material to responsible end markets. This is not necessarily the case for California, so we have other options to work with the MRF. So it could be done through the reimbursements in line with statute and regulation. It could also be done through an agreement on data and information sharing. If we can get that information from the MRFs, it's obviously easier for us to then verify the end markets. And finally, the other option we are considering is to contract directly with some end markets or with intermediate supply chain entities as part of the material strategy I will present in a few slides. Because we understand that for some of them, we need to invest directly in the facility, and that investment could come with an obligation to share information, chain of custody information around the source of material they are processing from California. Next slide over, please. So we have identified the REM. Now we need to qualify the end markets against the REM requirements. And those REM requirements are established in the rules, in the draft rule right now. And we have actually four main requirements that are very similar to what we have in the state of Oregon. The first one is for an end market to be compliant with laws and regulation. That means, for example, that they are meeting the obligation they have in the permits they have. For instance, a wastewater permit. That's the requirement number one. Requirement number two is to ensure that that facility is transparent, meaning that they maintain records on the chain of custody, they maintain records on applicable laws and regulation, and they are in agreement to be audited by a CAA third-party auditor. The third and perhaps very important requirement is to make sure that the operation of that facility is environmentally sound. And you will see in the next slide that this is critical because we need to define what is the methodology to ensure the compliance with that rule. The rule simply states that a facility needs to minimize discharge of emissions, effluents, and material produced. But how do you do that more in a concrete manner? We will explain that in a bit. And the last requirement is to make sure that the facility achieve a recycling yield that has to be established by CAA in the program plan. Next slide, please. We know by now you know how we intend to identify the responsible end market, what are the different requirements for end market to meet so that they could be qualified as REM. And so what is the how? What is CAA's approach for that? So we intend to apply what we call the three-step approach. The first step is to do an initial screening. So we pre-approve the markets by asking them to provide a self-attestation form, meaning stating that they met the different requirements, and by providing permits that they have or any kind of certification that could support the compliance actually to those requirements. The second step is the reporting review. So on a quarterly basis, we intend to review the data that will be provided by both the MRFs and the end markets. And that will be to detect any anomalies or to make sure that we have identified all the end markets that we could. But the most important part of the verification is the third step, and that's the audit. Audit that we want to be performed by a third-party verification body, or simply said, an auditor. And that auditor will verify each end market against the compliance with the REM requirements. But in order to do that, we need a methodology. And to do that methodology, we need to establish a standard. And that's what we are committed to in order to make sure we could apply that step of verification. Next slide, please. So why are we developing a standard? Actually, we just had the kickoff meeting with SCS, which is the standard development organization that will work with us on that. So there are four main reasons why we want to develop a REM standard. The first one is that, as you have heard me from the beginning, this is a statutory obligation for CAA to verify the end market against the REM requirements. And that's not just for the state of California. This is also for Colorado, for Oregon, and even for the upcoming state like Washington. So that's the first reason. The second one is around the liability. In order for CAA to declare end market as REM compliant or REM non-compliant, and so requiring to take any kind of corrective action, we need a methodology that is clear, that is recognized, and that is approved by the industry. The third reason for developing a REM standard is to build trust. As I've said, REM is a new concept. So by developing a standard, we will allow the different interested parties to engage in the process, through the public consultation, through the standard development committee that I will explain in a bit. We want to build the confidence that this system is actually a system that is efficient and recognized by the different industry and facilities that will use that. And finally, this is around efficiency. Many end markets are processing material from multiple states. And so you want to avoid as much as possible to have an audit coming from each of the jurisdiction requirements. Next slide, please. So in terms of timeline, we are, as I have mentioned, we have just gone through the kickoff meeting with SCS. We intend to have a first draft of the standard by early next year. This will be done with the support of a standard development committee that will represent both industry, regulators, and NGOs. And we will try to have a standard established on a consensus based. Once established, we will go to a first public consultation. Then we will pilot the standard with targeted facilities to ensure that it's practical to implement. Do a new version of the standard and integrate the pilot results in that. Go to a final public consultation before we finalize the standard. So as you can see, this is quite a long process. It will lead us up until mid-2027. So what does it mean in terms of implementation of REM verification in California? That means we will start the first few months of EPR implementation in 2027 by going through the initial screening steps. And as soon as we have a standard, we will be ready to kick off the audit process. Next slide, please. So I'm done with the verification piece of the REM, the responsible end market approach. I will move in the next couple of slides on how CAA intends to develop the different end markets. So where is actually end market development fit in the overall CAA strategy? CAA is developing a strategy, a high-level material advancement strategy that goes in a series of 6 steps. The first step is to make sure we have a priority list of material. And this is actually complete. Candice, if you just click one time, we will see that this one is done. And that's more or less the material I have presented earlier. So, PET thermoform, film and flex, et cetera, et cetera. The step right after this one is to make sure we create a roadmap. So we identify what is the challenge for each of those material, what do we want to achieve, what are the key indicators, and how do we align with the industry on that. To move then to the step after, which is creating partnership. We don't want to duplicate the efforts. And I will provide an example right after with film and flexible. You will see that we want to make sure that we are able to create this partnership to foster the investment and the innovation. So that approach is tailored by each of the material. And then the application of the roadmap is what comes next. The idea is to start with the beginning and the far end of the supply chain. So starting to work with the design of the product in order to make sure that it's designed for a higher recyclability, and working as well on the end market piece. So very from the beginning to the end, and then trickle down to the other aspect of the supply chain, the MRF sortation improvements, the need to grow collection, to grow for material to be accessible for collection, and obviously to educate consumers on what to do with the material. Next slide, please. So in terms of where we are right now, we are, as I've said, building that roadmap. So I will just give you 2 examples today. And the first one is film and flexible. What is the challenge for film and flexible? It's kind of obvious when you see the screen here. we have currently limited end market capacity for film and flex that are collected through curbside program. We are estimating that the current capacity for that type of feedstock is roughly around 14,000 tons from California, while we have a supply of residential film and flexible a bit more than 500,000 tons. So we need to collect, sort, and recycle 326,000 tons more material in order to meet the 65% recovery targets. So just from an end market perspective, we understand that we have a big gap here. And we have obviously sorting challenges. We know that material could wrap around the equipment. We know that film and flex could, contaminate other streams, such as the paper stream. So this is definitely something that we keep in mind building the strategy. And what is that strategy, actually? So if you go to the next slide, Candice, please. The strategy is to start by focusing on the demand, creating more demand, more end markets. And so we do that while we advance curbside collection and MRF sortation. My colleague Roxanne is here. She is leading a group we call the CAA Film and Flex Task Force, which is regrouping different industry association and interest holders in order to avoid the duplication of efforts here. The gap is huge, and we need to make sure that everyone contributes and we avoid duplicating the effort. So collaboration will be key for film and flexible, but obviously we will rapidly go into investing in both end markets, MRFs, and secondary sorting facilities in order to make sure that we could meet the target explained in the slide just before. And finally, one of the other key actions that we will take is make sure that we are able to pilot alternative collection methods to measure performance and efficiency of that system as well. So that was the example number one. That will be my last slide here before we move to the Q&A. The example number two is the polycoated paperboard advancement strategy. Starting with the challenge, what is the key challenge for that material? Well, it's pretty obvious when you see the map on the screen here, is that we have a lack of recycling capacity on the West Coast. The map is only for polycoated paper cups and bells, but it could be somehow, not exactly, but somehow applicable to different polycoated paperboard products. And you could see on that map that we have only one, maybe a second one in California, that is actually processing that kind of product. So we need definitely to work on that. The other challenge is that we have a lot of different formats of polycoated paper products. Could be printed, not printed, could have an inner and an outer layer of plastic, sometimes just an inner layer, so it varies widely. And that actually brings sorting and end market challenges. So what is the strategy for this one? The strategy is to make sure we foster material acceptance in current end markets. But before we go any further, we need to assess what is the current situation. So we are going to assess the opportunities and the limitation of that material acceptance in mixed paper and in carton bales in the US. That will allow us to identify what are the investment needs at those end markets, and at the same time, trying to better understand how is that material flowing in a MRF. With all those three components, we will be able to draft a better strategy to foster material acceptance in the current end markets. So I think I'm pretty sure that was my last slide. So we can move to the Q&A session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Pierre. And now we are going to turn it over to Roxanne and Ross, who will be moderating the Q&A portion of the webinar. As a reminder, if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A feature. We do have many questions already, so we will try to get to as many as possible. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Frances. We'll go ahead and start with a higher level one. There's a question here that states, what assurances are plastic REMs to provide? What assurances are plastic REMs to provide to demonstrate that plastic pellet or flake is actually used to replace virgin material? Good question. I'm going to go ahead and direct that to Ross to answer.
Yeah, so assurances, so the law and regulation really focuses on ensuring that cover materials in California ultimately make it to the responsible end market. They don't focus so much on what happens after. That is handled mostly by the source reduction efforts, but what you will see in the REM evaluation is the component of yield, in which they want to know that an end market is actually recycling a lot and over a certain threshold. And that's defined by, it's still to be defined within the standard development process, but that would involve an auditor looking at input records, material output records, and how much goes to landfill. So ultimately, if a material was not being used to replace a virgin material, recycled end market material, it would be showing up going to a landfill as its final disposition. So, and would affect the ultimate yield. So there's some incentive there for recyclers to actually support and ensure materials are getting to further down the supply chain.
Great. Thank you, Ross. This question has been asked a few different ways, so I'm going to try and combine it so we can get the most out of our time. There's a question here that says, if we invest in end markets, are we prioritizing those in the US? And there are other questions regarding, does the end market have to necessarily be in California? So I'm going to kind of combine that. I'll take the first hit at it, and Pierre, please go ahead and chime in. But I think the answer is that a facility can be in or outside of California or abroad. But if it's outside of the U.S., it must be equivalence in terms of California standards. If it's another state, CalRecycle may require documentation that it meets comparable, federal or state environmental laws. So it has to be very equivalent. A material sent out of the state may count only if producer responsibility organization maintains full documentation for the final recycling location. So hopefully that answers some questions. And Pierre, please feel free to add on to that.
I will simply say that this is the core, or I would say the principle of REM, is to make sure that every end market, wherever they are located, are actually complying to the same level and the same standards. So that could be in California, but that could be in Malaysia as well. They will have to comply to the same level of requirements.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna skip to, excuse the going back and forth. I wanna make sure I find my exact ones here. Okay. All right, we had a question about voluntary recycling programs and if they will be something that CalRecycle will look into, or sorry, that CAA will look into supporting. And one of those mentioned was the store drop-off. I'd absolutely say yes to that. That is a system that we are looking at closely, not just for store drop-off, but for community collective programs. It's one of the channeled areas that we're looking at for Film and Flex. So yes, I think that would be something we are absolutely interested in expanding and making sure that we and eventually help fund.
I'll jump in. I see there's one on, do you have a third-party auditor in mind? Who might that be? And what would their process look like? There's not a single third-party auditor outlined. First, we're drafting the standard of which any third-party auditor would then conduct an audit. But there would be certification body requirements. So we would look for something like an ISO 17065 accreditation for a certification body, which is another independent verification that the group is up to a certain expectation of impartiality, independence, process, confidentiality in their assessment. 17021 is another one. We'd also look for certification bodies that have regional experience. So we'll need it won't be a single, we'll need a lot to support the global impact of this. So we'll need local auditors who can be conversant with the employees at the facility they're auditing. The goal is to have a confidential audit with the results reported of the audit reported, and whether a market is deemed compliant or responsible or not. And hopefully with that, trying to maintain proprietary information and not disclose unnecessary information.
Great, thank you. We also had a question about social justice. This came up in a few different questions. I'm going to let Pierre go ahead and take this one on a little bit, but let's see, make sure I ask it in the correct manner here. Is there also a social justice human rights component for the workers or only emission standards? And this is asked a few different ways, so I'll let Pierre take this one on.
Yeah, so that would be that is something that we will cover through the REM standard developments. Some states also have more specific language around social or environmental justice, so we will need to cover that. I would say in principle, though, the definition of responsible end market cover the need to minimizes the risk to public health, so that would have to be covered somehow. But as I have mentioned during that presentation, the detail of the methodology will be critical in that. So the answer is yes, but would have to be covered through the REM standard development.
And the standard development will consist of a balanced stakeholder committee consisting of industry groups, state regulators, non-NGOs, and academic participants. So there's a fair determination of what that is. There was another question relative to, do responsible end markets have to meet California laws regardless of their location? And that's where kind of one of the particular challenges of building this standard is that you have many different expectations, many different standards for legal compliance, which is the first step in responsible end markets. So you can't just expect California compliant regulations to be applied, because essentially that would be going beyond California's jurisdiction, but to build a robust and adaptable methodology that can be applied globally is our goal.
Great, thank you. There's many questions on this. Will the REM study and data that CAA is conducting for California be made public to inform end markets? And I'm going to pass that to Pierre.
So just to make sure I understand the question is around whether the study we are making and to which we have presented a brief overview will be made public?
Like the Moore Associates or referenced or...
So more details of those studies are likely to be presented in the program plan, but I'm not sure this was an intent to release publicly all of those studies. Sometimes they are made for different states. Sometimes they are made not only for REM purposes. So I don't think this was the intent to release those studies publicly, but to provide a bit more detail in the program plan, it will be.
Great, thank you. Okay, we have a
yeah, go ahead.
We have a question with composting. Can composting facilities still be an REM if they don't accept all covered materials designated for composting, such as bioplastics? What standards is CA considering for composting facilities?
Yeah, it was partially covered by our colleagues Isabel a couple of weeks ago. So I don't think what you process or what you refuse to process is relevant to whether you will qualify as a REM, but you will need to meet the different requirements as the environmental soundness, for instance. So in the webinar, it was presented a couple of references that can be used, but again, that the details of how we are going to measure the responsible. How are we going to measure whether a compost facility is responsible? The details is going to be developed through the REM standard development.
A question on relative to if many end markets, many MRFs sell to brokers. If a broker sells to a REM, is that an authorized sales channel process? Of which I'll go ahead and say yes. The important part is that brokers are important in the process to identify REMs, and for California, the MRFs who are selling to brokers will need to work with them to identify all the end markets so that downstream of the brokers, so that they can ensure they can still ship material and obtain reimbursement.
Great. I noticed a question here on what types of investments would you conceive making to expand responsible end markets for products like film and flexibles, research support, facility investment. Good question. Obviously, film and flexibles are very important. California has the most prescriptive language and the most aggressive dates on here. So yes, we are considering various channels. We are not just looking at MRF, upgrades and things like that to optically sort or remove film. We're also looking at secondary recycling as well as collection pickup, not just from store drop off, but community pickup, and potentially looking at investment in things like the different types of technologies for sorting. So we are going through that analysis right now, developing an idea of what that looks like, and after that, pilot programs would be the next step. Okay, this is an interesting one. Based on the answer that was given to the first question, and that was the first question you answered, Ross. If a facility shreds plastic waste and then sends a large amount of that shredded waste to a coal plant to be used as fuel, which is not recycling, would that facility still be considered a responsible end market?
If they're sending that to fuel, it would likely show up in their yield criteria that it's going to either landfill, incineration, or waste to energy, and would not count as a valid recycled output. So it's likely that through the yield requirement, that would be, and if they're doing a significant amount, it would be cause them to dip below the yield threshold for responsibility. So I would say likely no, if they're doing in such volume that it would dip below the yield. And yeah, no, I'm not going to confuse requirements.
Okay, this came up and it's very interesting. It's come up a few times. Many manufacturers are certified by the ISCC system. Could that be used? That has been asked, and it's certainly something that we have looked into. I will let Pierre go ahead and take that on since we've been discussing it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So because as you have seen, like there is many REM requirements, and we are trying to evaluate how other certification or verification system could partially cover that. So for instance, if you are a facility that is, to keep the example of ISCC Plus, then you are already providing some evidence on compliance to laws and regulation, and you are already providing some documentation on transparency. So obviously, those elements could be covered and help us then doing a verification that are on the remaining aspects. So, for instance, the environmental soundness criteria. So that's the kind of thing that we are exploring. Actually, for the state of Oregon, we have had to provide a benchmark of different certifications, and we have provided a couple this benchmark for a couple of them, including ISCC, but also APR, FSC, the Aluminum Stewardship Initiative. So we can provide that information as well in the program plan.
Thank you, Pierre. I believe that's all the time we have for questions. So we appreciate it. Obviously, there's going to be a long road for REM, and we're here to help you answer those. So sending it back to Francis, and thank you, Roxanne and Pierre and Emily.
Thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate your time and participation. The next step is to provide your feedback. Your feedback is very important in developing a robust and effective plan for achieving California's ambitious recycling and packaging waste reduction goals. Please complete the questionnaire using the link provided in the chat. You will also find a link to the questionnaire in an email following this webinar, or you can access the questionnaire by using the QR code on your screen. To do that, simply open the camera app on your smartphone or tablet, point your camera at the QR code on the screen, and then tap the link that pops up. That will take you directly to the questionnaire. Please submit your responses by 11:59 p.m. Pacific Time on November 22nd. We look forward to receiving your input. Next slide, please. You can stay up to date by following us on social media, visiting our website, or emailing us at info@circularaction.org. Thank you again for joining us today.